I call this talk Squad Radios from Omaha Beach to Heartbreak Ridge to Drang Valley. The reason for that is it's the time period during which these battles were fought that these radios cover. Omaha Beach, we all know, is D-Day, June 6, 1944. Heartbreak Ridge was a month-long battle that was fought from 13 September to 15 October 1951 between the United Nations forces and the Communist Chinese and North Korean forces for a mountain range that went back and forth between the two sides for 30 days. And eventually it led the United Nations to declare that they will not fight a battle like that any longer. There were 4,000 fatalities on total on both sides. The United Nations decided no longer would they fight a battle for property that turned out to be, it was eventually abandoned. Heartbreak Ridge was eventually abandoned by the UN. And Drang Valley is the first offensive mission of the Vietnam War. It occurred in 4 days in October of 1965. It was a battle in which the United States 1st Cavalry, the helicopter soldiers, landed in the Drang Valley, the central highlands of North Vietnam, to engage the Viet Cong army. They did not know, but there were 4 battalions against 4 battalions of North Vietnamese against, I think it was 3,000 U.S. troops. That battle was memorialized in the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young. It was based on a book by Colonel Harold Moore, who was the commanding officer during that battle. So the radios that I happen to bring with me tonight cover from World War II through Korean conflict, which is still going on, and the Drang Valley, which is the first offensive battle in Vietnam. Before we do, get out your HTs if you have them, so that you can have them in front of you and compare the technology that's available today, 70 years after the first radio I'm going to talk about was built, compared to what the technology was back in those days. So, what is a squad radio? And according to my definition, it's a wireless combat voice communications device having the following characteristics. It's voice, push-to-talk radio. It's self-contained, it's battery powered, and includes an antenna, microphone, and speaker. There are other radios that you may be familiar with that require a separate generator set, for example, to generate the B+ for the tubes. They may have a separate battery case, the Special Forces radios from Vietnam era, the HF radios that ran 100 watts or so. They have a separate battery case. It's not totally self-contained. It's handheld or pack carried. In other words, you don't have to set it up. It's ready to go in its native configuration. It's operable while in motion. The Special Forces radios I mentioned that are HF based, they have to be set up, an antenna has to be strung, the batteries connected, etc., and the antenna tuned. Not the radios that I'm talking about. And finally, the squad radios I have are all capable of operating on an amateur radio frequency. So those of you with a technician class license or higher, you can operate these things, and I'll tell you what frequency they operate on. All except one. You technicians, all except one. Now, nomenclature. This is, what is this? This is a Baofeng UV5RE Plus, $40 radio. Everybody's got their favorite radios. They have a model number that describes it. The nomenclature are basically the model numbers that the military use to describe the radios and the accessories that go with it. For example, the first radio I'm going to show you is a BC611, which is part of the SCR 536 series. Please allow me to bore you a little bit in the beginning. It's going to get interesting later on. The system type SCR 536 does not mean signal core radio. It means set, complete, radio, typical military jargon. That means it is the collection of all of the elements that go into making that radio what it is. However, the component type is the basic element itself, the basic component, which tells you, is it a receiver, is it a transmitter, is it an antenna? For example, if the nomenclature begins with AN something, with an exception I'll tell you about in a minute, it's an antenna. A CS is a carry case. EE is a handset telephone that's connected by wire strung from a reel between point to point. The Army-Navy nomenclature is the more modern version, which was begun, I think, in November of 1942, if I'm not, yeah, there you go, 1942. It's a little bit different. It's RT 505, PRC 25, and that means the RT is the basic component, which is the receiver transmitter. So if you're holding the RT component, that tells you what the device is. Everything else is an accessory to it. For example, we all know RG is bulk coax cable. I'm going to be talking about BA's batteries. We know about UG RF components, various connectors. I'm also going to talk about H for a head, hand, or chest set microphone, earphone combination. Now, that's supposed to be a typewriter. The system designators, which is the combination of equipment, fit in these categories. And I'm going to focus on what we're going to be talking about tonight. The first letter designator is where the device is installed. Am I getting this right? Where the device is installed. Is it installed in an aircraft? Is it installed in a submarine? Is it air transportable? Et cetera, et cetera. What I'm talking about tonight are the PRC-25, the PRC-6. It's a pack or portable radio. The technology in use is designated by the second letter. Is it infrared? Is it, believe it or not, carrier pigeon in World War II? Carrier wire. What we're talking about is radio. There's also sonar, there's radar, sound in air like a PA system. The final letter designator is why are you using this equipment? For what purpose does it serve? Well, the PRC is a pack or portable radio that's used for communication, as opposed to bombing, as opposed to gun or searchlight directing. I also have a PRR, which is a receiver only, and I have a PRT, which is a transmitter only. Now we'll get into the radios. World War II, Europe. We'll talk about the one radio I brought from that time period, and that is the iconic VC611. Everybody has seen this in a World War II movie at one time or another, and there's a picture of a GI using it. And that's this radio here. You can come up and look at these at the end. I'll extend the antenna so you can see what it looks like. Here's a little bit of background of the BC611. It was developed in 1941. There's a patent by Motorola, and that's the label that is typically found on the BC611 right between the speaker and the microphone. It was the original handy-talkie, and there is a magazine advertisement for a World War II promotion of the handy-talkie. That's where the term handy-talkie came from. There is a walkie-talkie. I'll talk about that at the tail end. It's a single channel, two crystals, a transmit crystal and a receive crystal. The transmit crystal is on the frequency. In this case, it's 3,885 kilocycles. The receive frequency is 455 kilocycles higher because that's the IF, the intermediate frequency of the radio. So there are two crystals for each channel, and all of that weight is just to get one radio channel. How many do you have in your HT for about 4 or 5 ounces? 100, 200 channels? There were approximately 40,000 of these things manufactured during World War II. They continued to be manufactured through the 1950s. As a matter of fact, the model that I have here, right here, is manufactured by Nippon Electric, ironically, in 1953.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's an HF radio?
Pardon me? Let me get to that.
Oh.
Here are the specifications. The frequency range is 3.5 to 6 megacycles. None of these radios ever operated on a megahertz, so I'm not going to use the term tonight. These are old radios, they all operated on megacycles, so don't correct me, because I'm right. So it's basically an 80-meter radio.
Wow.
200 milliwatts. This is 5 watts. Go ahead, compare it yourself. The total weight with batteries, 5.5 pounds. Do the math, that's 29 pounds per watt. 29 pounds per watt, okay? 200 milliwatts. The batteries, essentially there were 2 batteries in the BC611. One is, those of you who are of a certain age know what B+ voltage is. It's the high voltage on the plates of the vacuum tubes in the radio. And there are vacuum tubes in here. 105 volts. I get 10 9-volt batteries strung in series to get 90 volts, and they'll work fine. There's also a 1.5 volt filament battery. So there are 2 batteries required to operate this radio. And they're 5 miniature vacuum tubes. They're literally about as big as the top knuckle of my thumb, and there are 5 of them inside that radio.
So is it acorn tubes?
Nope. No, they're just sub-miniature vacuum tubes. The features of the radio, what it does, how it works. There are 2 controls, on-off and a push-to-talk. The on-off switch is activated by extending the antenna out of the case. And I'll show you that in the next slide. And turn it off by pushing the antenna back in. And there's a push-to-talk switch, so they're called private-proof radios. There's not much you can do to screw it up. The transmit and receive changeover function is conducted by a 14-pole double-throw switch. So there are 14 circuits that get changed from transmit to receive by a mechanical switch, which you'll see in the next slide. The operator's hand is part of the antenna. There is an instruction that tells the technician to hold the radio and adjust the various tuning devices so that the capacitance of the hand and the human body will not affect the final outcome of the operation of the radio. So the hand and body is part of the antenna system for that radio. There is an AN, remember, antenna 190 direction finding loop for Army Pathfinders. The Pathfinders were the folks, the 101st and 82nd Airborne Division, that jumped into Normandy the night before D-Day. They were supposed to have set up camp. They got blown all over hell's creation because the pilots of the planes decided they wanted to get home early. So the pilots jumped too soon or they jumped too late. And the DF antenna was going to be used so that when the paratroopers landed with these radios, they could turn them on and DF and find each other and locate each of the squads. The antenna is nickel plated to reduce reflection. It's not corroded. You do not want to have a very shiny antenna on a battlefield for obvious reasons. So it's nickel plated. Here's the parts layout inside that box.
Wow.
Hand wired. Everything's hand wired. What?
I was going to say, can we move it out of the way?
Yep. Basically, this is the way it's being held. The on-off toggle switch, which is up here in the corner, essentially when you pull the antenna, that switch goes this way and that way. That's how the on-off function works. This is the 14-pole double-throw switch. These silver rectangles are 2, 4, 6, and I have to go over here, 8, 10, 12, and there's one behind another pair behind the glare here. Those are the 14 circuits that get changed between transmit and receive by sliding this button this way and back. It's spring-loaded to return back here, so it's in the receive position. And that button is activated through a mechanical mechanism, which is very tough to operate back here. Essentially, by pushing down on that push-to-talk device, it's a pivoted arrangement. So when I push down on it, this piece kicks out this way and it pushes that little cylinder, the transmit-receive activator. More than you needed to know about a BC611. The transmit-receive crystals are up in the top, and the 5 tubes are shown in profile and top-down view. They're held in place with little rubber grommets for vibration resistance. I'll put this over here for now. Now let's move to Korea.
I have a question.
Sure.
So what's the range on it?
It's 200 milliwatts at HF with a small inefficient antenna. It's enough to get from the landing craft to the battleship 3 miles out in the ocean.
Okay.
It's not 5 miles, 10 miles of range. Yeah.
Before I ask what I wanted, which is what that other protrusion is on the top, I would just add that.
This thing?
Remember these people, David,
Yeah.
were operating in a much quieter,
Oh.
lower noise floor environment
Yeah.
than there is today.
Yeah.
There's no comparison.
This other thing, is this what you're asking about?
Yeah.
It protects the antenna. That's
Oh.
all that does.
Oh, and that's a keeper position.
That's a keeper position. This is also used to park the direction finder element, the receiver.
Got it.
There's a tuning device on the direction finding antenna that gets parked on top of this, and this lid gets screwed down to hold that platform in place. Yeah.
I didn't see, where were the batteries?
Oh, the batteries, let's see if I can
I didn't, was it visible on
No.
the? Oh, okay.
I can show the batteries, I think. I can show where the batteries go in this one. This is the electronics, this is the printed circuit board. The batteries would go in this void here.
Oh,
They're two
that's why it looked
separate.
so thin, because it wasn't shown, okay.
Right, it's actually twice as wide as what was shown there on the side view. The battery up at the top is the high voltage battery. This is where the 10 9-volt batteries go in my design. And there are two D cells wired in parallel, not series. So the tip to tip and base to base are wired together and then inserted back in here. What I'm told the Army did if the batteries ran down is they would take a used, very important, used 50 caliber machine gun shell, brass shell, shove it in and then put one D cell battery in if they ran out of D cell batteries, rather than the standard issue battery, which is oddly shaped. But I use D cell batteries to begin with. Yeah.
Any idea what that would cost in today's dollars?
No.
No?
No. I think I read that they were $500 or $600 each back in those days, multiplied by 10 or 15, so several $1,000s a piece. But you would never hand manufacture something like this. The repeatability is just not there. But this was war, and we did what we needed to do. Yeah.
Gene, with the RDF,
Yeah.
was it just a matter of hearing the audio and determining that it was in the right direction?
Yeah. The antenna has a sense position on it to tell you whether it's this way or this way, depending on whether you're looking at it. I didn't bring it with me, but yeah, the antenna, essentially the transmitting position, would hold the push to talk for 10 seconds or so, allow the troops a mile or so around to do a DF on it, and then stop. Now let's get into Korea.
Just a quick, so like,
Yeah.
the TV shows where they used to, checkmate king 2.
This is White Rook over 10 miles away. No.
They did, okay.
No, that's pure fiction.
Okay.
The BC-1000, which I'll show you in a slide in the end, might have been able to do that, but that's different technology and different figure of merit, the pounds per watt. Where do you see that? The first radio I'm going to talk about during the Korean War period is the PRIC-10, the PRC-10. The RT-176 is the radio transmitter box itself, which is this first box on the front table here. The PRIC-10 is the collection of instruments to it, but the GIs decided they'd rather say the word PRIC-10 and PRIC-6 and PRIC-25 than the more polite RT-176 designator. Essentially, that was the background. The design was begun near the end of World War II. So as World War II was running down, the War Department decided it needed to improve the utility of battlefield communication. So they began the design of this device. It incorporated new pencil tubes developed for artillery proximity fuses, and those tubes are shown actual size. I'm just kidding. Let me see. Nope, I don't want to do that. The proximity fuse, let me give you a little bit of, I'm going to talk about various elements of history during the various wars during this talk. The proximity fuse was developed down in Silver Spring, Maryland by the Applied Physics Laboratory. It is a fuse that essentially detects the presence of a large metal thing in front of it, which hopefully is an enemy airplane. And that proximity fuse, essentially, it sent out a pulse of radio waves, a continuous pulse of radio waves. It was not radar. The echo came back into the head of the shell and mixed with the outgoing carrier. So the Doppler shift told the electronics inside the artillery shell that you're close to the object, you can detonate yourself. Those tubes, by the way, are designed to stand 20,000 Gs of force upon launch. When an artillery shell is launched from a ground station, it is launched with 20,000 Gs of force. Those tubes are designed to withstand that force in the longitudinal direction. So they're very rugged tubes. However, they're just like an ammonia inhalant capsule. You can crush them with your fingers axially. But longitudinally. Axially, in the direction, they're very strong. Those tubes were incorporated in the Prick 10. And by the way, the proximity fuse was not used in Europe because duds would land on land. They were not allowed to be used in Europe until the Battle of the Bulge, in which case they were set to explode 50 feet over the Germans' heads and basically obliterate them from the air. They were used successfully in the Pacific. The statistics I heard were something along the lines of it would take 2,000 artillery shells without the proximity fuse to down a kamikaze fighter. With the proximity fuse, that went down to 600. So it was a 3-to-1 reduction in the amount of armament needed to take down a kamikaze plane, which is why they were used. And duds would fall in the water. So they were allowed to be used in the Pacific theater of operation before the European theater of operation.
I have a question.
Yep.
So how large is the shell that has these tubes?
There is a model of proximity fuse head at the Naval Academy Museum in Annapolis. It's about this big, and it screws into the top of the warhead itself. So the shell, I think, is about 4 or 5 feet tall. All of the electronics, including, I think there were four tubes in the proximity fuse, fit into an epoxy device about that big, into a point with a thread on the bottom of it, and just screwed in. The batteries for this, by the way, were liquid batteries, which were mixed once the shell was fired. The shelf life of batteries for these proximity fuses was months, and who knows how long it would take for a proximity fuse to actually get fired. So rather than have a carbon zinc battery that would deplete itself within months, it was a liquid chemical battery, a paste battery, that essentially would be mixed once the shell was launched and began its spiral. So the centrifugal force of the spinning would mix the components in the battery. So it was essentially, that's how duds happened. Sometimes they didn't energize. But they were dead until they were launched, and then they became alive for about 3 seconds.
So if they fired one of these and it didn't get proximity to a target?
It would fall in the ocean.
But it'd still be a live round that would just be in the ocean?
Yeah, it would be in the ocean, so they're still down there. So if you go scuba diving at 15,000 feet, be careful. The first prototype was built in 1950. And we're talking about the Prick 10. It's got VFO frequency control, which means it's continuously tunable, and that's good and it's bad. I'll tell you why it's bad in the next slide, or a couple of slides. Specifications are, we went from 80 meters up to low band VHF with the Prick 10, and all radios since then. So this operates quite nicely on 6 meters. They're all set up to operate on 51.0 megahertz. Sorry, megacycles. The frequency range is 38 to 54.9 megacycles. Power output is 0.9 watts. And it's wideband FM as opposed to AM. The total weight is 26 pounds, so that's 28 pounds per watt. A little bit better than 29, but it's still pretty heavy. There's one battery that's got multiple voltages in it, 135, 67.5, 1.5 volt filament, and negative 6 volt DC bias. Yeah?
Gene, why did they go to FM?
Because there were, first of all, FM was invented in the 30s, but it wasn't accepted for military use by the War Department until after World War II. In World War II, they experimented a little bit with FM. Am I saying that right? Yes. Everything else in World War II was AM, but after FM, it was determined that FM is a lot, as we all know, it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot more robust than AM, because it's a wideband signal. There are 16 of those little pencil tubes and one sub-miniature power amp tube, which I'll show you in the next slide, I think. Oh no, features. It's the first antenna to use the flexible steel tape, first radio to use the flexible steel tape antenna, which is still in use today. I mean, we've seen these things. Okay, you see them on the news. They're still in use today. It's essentially the same kind of steel from a tape measure, but it's flexible, and there's a gooseneck here that allows it to be positioned. So if I were to put this on its side, in base position, I can raise it and make it still make it a vertical antenna. How are we doing for time?
You're good, fine.
Okay. It's the first use of modular construction to facilitate troubleshooting. The individual circuits have individual modules that can be pulled out and replaced with a new one, rather than troubleshooting an entire radio on a bench. It includes a 1 megacycle crystal for VFO calibration. Because it's a VFO, which has got backlash and it's not always lined up right on the frequency, there's a 1 megacycle VFO crystal in there that's got harmonics at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up into the top end in the 50 megacycle range. And you can zero in on, for example, 51 megacycles. You turn the crystal calibrator on, you'll hear the calibrator signal at 51 megacycles. It's similar in design to two other radios, the Prick 8, which is used for armor, and the Prick 9, which is used for artillery. Notice that the Prick 10 and Prick 8 can communicate with Prick 9s because both artillery and infantrymen don't want to have artillery firing on them. So the artillery, all of the ranges of these radios overlap with one another. This is the parts layout showing the bottom of the radio. And all hand wired again. The dial lock. That is a set screw. Say that this is the VFO dial. If I'm in battle, I could bump this thing and put myself totally out of connection with the artillery, without connection to my comrades. So what is done is that dial lock activates a set screw, which basically screws into the shaft to keep it from moving. You can still bump it, you can still move it by hand, but it's not as easy. So essentially that takes about a quarter turn to lock the VFO dial. It's not welded, you can move it as I said, but it's a lot better than leaving it free running. Though the pencil tubes again have got rubber grommets to keep them isolated from vibration. There are a total of 16, you can only see the tops of 4. Some of the other ones are in the circuit modules, which are the cases down below and throughout the rest of the radio. The battery connector is at the bottom. This entire upper chassis plugs into the lower chassis, which contains a battery, and there's a mating connector on the battery top, so they basically just mate through that connector. The power amplifier tube, that little sub-miniature tube as big as my thumb knuckle, is there. And the last thing is the MFP, the moisture and fungus proof coating, which is essentially shellac and beeswax. Once the radio has been aligned, it's sprayed on the interior to keep fungus from growing inside the radios in jungle environments. Now the Prick 6 is the banana phone. which everybody thinks Motorola got the idea for their first micro tack from this. But this is the Korean War vintage handy talkie. And it also has the ability to plug in a handset, the H33 handset, which is on the Prick 10. That could be plugged into here. And I'll put that over here. Notice how heavy it is. In the background, it was developed by Raytheon after World War II as a successor to the BC-611. It's FM, as opposed to AM, which is what the BC-611 was. It entered service in 1951. It's a single channel, single crystal control transmitter and receiver. So there's one channel, one crystal needed to get both the transmit and receive. The transmitter is phase locked to the receiver in this radio. So you tune up the transmitter, the receiver will follow suit. And I think most of us have seen those crystals. That also is a full-size, actual size crystal. Just kidding. The features of the Prick 6, there are 3 controls on it. One is the on-off control. It's either the external microphone off or internal microphone. The push-to-talk on the side, and a volume control. So it's not quite private-proof. Somebody could have the volume turned all the way down and forget about it. But those are the 3 very simple controls that are available on the Prick 6. There is an air valve to relieve the internal pressure due to heat from the tubes. Remember I said you can crush the tubes like an ammonia inhalant vial? If this thing were allowed to operate in a tropical environment for hours at a time under a sealed volume, the pressure inside would build up such that it would crush the tubes inside. So what was decided to be installed is a pressure relief valve here, which basically allows the expanding air inside here to evacuate somewhat, maintain the pressure on the inside, so that the tubes don't crush. So the tubes don't crush themselves. It also accommodates an external H33 handset, which I mentioned earlier. And it also has a direction-finding loop to find your comrades on the battlefield. Specifications, again, high-band VHF, 300 milliwatts, 6.75 pounds. Do the math, 22 pounds per watt. We're getting a lot better, but it's still a lot of weight to carry around. Today, that excess weight can be taken up in food or ammunition on the part of the infantrymen. Right now, it's just taken up dead weight for radios. One battery provides 90, 45, 1.5, and 4.5 volts bias. And I do that with 9-volt batteries, C cells, and AAA batteries. There are 12 pencil tubes and 1 sub-miniature power amplifier tube in the radio. And here's what in the radio looks like. That is the top third of the radio. It's from here up, what you're looking at right now. The battery connector is a rubber-covered 7-pin connector. There are 12 pencil tubes. I'm showing you 3 of them. Again, they're all protected by rubber grommets at the top. The single transmit receive crystal is in the corner. The power amplifier tube is standing up in the middle. There are 7 tuning capacitors with numbers on the scale, and you can pre-tune each of the capacitors depending on the frequency that you're, the frequency of the crystal, according to a chart that's on the cover of this radio on the inside. The antenna connector is up at the top. There are 4 IF coils that need to be adjusted during the tune-up. And that's the discriminator modulator packet. That's basically the detector element in an FM radio.
Please tell us about the antenna.
The antenna, it's a tape antenna as well. And basically that thing is stored around the side of the radio through the locking mechanisms, and there's a little slide here that docks it into position. So that's how it's stored. The CRT1 CPRC 26, that's a Canadian radio, hence the C prefix. That is another small low-band VHF radio. That is the final one on the table here. That is in its canvas bag, which can be clipped to harness on the infantryman. Background, it's a 6-channel equivalent of the Prick 6. So you would expect similar power. They were first made available in 1951 for the Korean conflict. There were about 4,500 manufactured by Philips and Rogers Majestic for the Canadian Army. Philips and Rogers Majestic are Canadian manufacturers. Many of the modules are interchangeable with Prick 10 modules. It's also copied by Britain and Australia with their respective design, and Holland has a solid state equivalent. And it was actually used, I'm told it's used by NATO into the 1980s. So it's a fairly remarkable rig. And that was the first military radio I bought back in, I don't know, 1983, something like that. So I've had that one for a while. Again, low band VHF, 300 milliwatts, 6 pounds. Oops, 6 pounds. Do the math, 20 pounds per watt versus 22 pounds per watt for the Prick 6. So we're getting a little bit better. Again, similar high voltage filament and bias battery lineup. Again, just like the Prick 6, 12 temperature tubes and a power amplifier tube. Features, it's got the fishing pole sectional antenna. Yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned something about solid state, and then it said tubes, and I always thought solid state was the opposite of a tube.
No, no.
Or tubes were replaced by solid state?
The Holland, the Dutch developed a solid state equivalent in terms of specifications.
Oh, not the Canadian.
Not the Canadian,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Yeah. By fishing pole antenna, I mean an antenna that comes apart like this. Okay, so it can be collapsed and stowed away. That doesn't use the tape antenna.
Is there a base loading coil?
Inside the radio. All of them have coils inside the radio. This, I think, is a cool feature about this particular design. The volume control has 2 positions, loud and soft. In the loud position, it's loud. In the soft position, the earpiece is soft. However, a microphone preamplifier is switched in because if you're in an environment such that you want to have your speaker volume quieter, you're probably going to be speaking a lot more quietly as well. So an amplifier is switched into the microphone circuit that boosts your whispered voice. So that's something I don't think anybody would have thought of if they weren't in a military situation. Again, circuit modules make the repair easy. You can take all of the guts out of the radio and put them on the tabletop and swap them with a good radio within 5 minutes. Now, Vietnam.
Okay, I just ask a question?
Sure.
Both of those handheld radios, typically how are they carried? I mean, slung over their back, or?
They all have canvas slings.
So they had to hold them in their hand the whole time?
While they were using them, or they could string them over their shoulder like a rifle. I don't want to do that with these because this is 70-year-old canvas and it will
Gotcha.
rip. But yeah, this is typically made to be slung over your shoulder.
Oh, okay.
So now we're moving into the late 1950s. Yeah.
How reliable were these radios? So the tube versions radios, how well did they work, I guess is basically what I'm asking.
Well, all of the radios lasted for a decade in battlefield conditions. So I would imagine that there's a couple of a set of radios here that didn't see much battle, and you'll see why when I get to it. But most of the other radios, all of the other radios, have been around for decades. The Prick 25 and its successor, a Prick 77, which is going to be part of this presentation, they've been around for 30 years. And there are some military, African militaries that still use them. I've seen them on the news. And I tell my wife, that's the radio I have. And she said, that's wonderful. The first one is the iconic RT505 or Prick 25. Anybody actually use these, a Prick 25 in military, in your military careers? Okay. Heavy radios. Anyway, that is the iconic radio that you will see in just about every movie depicting combat in Vietnam. There's a typical GI with the radio on his back. And all of these backpack radios have hard harnesses that they strap to. I didn't bring it in with me because then they can't sit on a desktop that way. They have to be laying on their side. It's tough to play with them that way. But that GI has got his radio strapped to his harness, which he then puts on his back. The background for this one, development began around 1958 from what I could see. It is the first synthesized transmitter and receiver for combat use, and it's got 2 preset channels. Kind of like the old-fashioned car radios where you push in a mechanical button and the dial moves to one preset position, 1 of 5 presets. This has got 2 mechanical presets on it. For example, one channel might have been used for tactical communications among the troops on the ground, and another channel might have been used to go from the ground to a fixed-wing aircraft that typically might be orbiting 10,000 feet, 5 miles away, out of range of small arms fire. But the folks in the ground, in the battlefield, would be able to talk up to the aircraft, which would then relay, it would basically have a repeater, talk to the artillery folks on the other side of the mountain ridge and give coordinates and essentially call for help on the other channel on this radio. So, or there may be a different squad that would be available on a different channel. So there are 2 preset channels available. Although there are 700 plus channels totally available, there are 2 presets. It was ready for deployment in 1962. They were intended to go over to Germany, to West Germany. However, Vietnam intervened, and the generals decided they wanted to send them into Vietnam because the Britons were VFO controlled. And people didn't remember to set the VFO lock set screw too frequently, so they were all over the place in frequency. Again, specifications. Yes?
You said that there are like 700 channels or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was only 2 usable at the time without sending it back for somebody.
No. There are 700 channels selectable through the dial. Anybody can change the channel.
Okay.
The presets
We're just for convenience.
and basically the presets can be activated in the dark because there's a mechanical stop. You rotate up against one mechanical stop, and rotate up against in the other direction for the other channel. So the presets can be essentially activated in the dark. If somebody says go to 48.95, you can dial it up
I got you.
yourself. The power vary depending on the frequency range. They're less efficient up at the high end because you see this goes up to 76 megacycles. Do the math. I'm going to take 2 watts at 50 megahertz. That's 13 pounds per watt. A lot better than 29 that we had before, but it's still not convenient to carry around. The battery, it was a 15-volt battery that also fed a DC to DC converter because there was one tube in a PRIC 25. And that DC to DC converter essentially boosted the 15 volts up to whatever was needed for the V plus for the tube. And the 15 volt string, the bottom 2 batteries, 1.5 volt batteries in the PRIC 25 battery was tapped to get 3 volts for the tube filament. There was also a piece of nichrome wire in series with that filament lead. Anybody have any idea why there was nichrome wire in series with the filament? I'll give you a hint. The filament is in the tube, which is used only on transmit. Does somebody have an idea?
Well, I was going to say, you can put a nichrome wire in series to reduce the turn-on surge on the UFO.
Yep, that's exactly it. If the tube were cold, Arctic conditions, for example, and you hit the push-to-talk switch, that surge of current would shatter the filament in the tube. So the nichrome wire was put in series to drop the surge current down into the tube until it warmed up after, it takes about a second for that tube filament to warm up. After a second, that nichrome wire is essentially not there because the current dropped down considerably. That's an astute observation. It's all solid state except for the 2DF4 power amplifier tube, that single tube that's still in the finals. It's the first radio to use 150 cycle per second tone squelch. It's basically CTCSS at 150 cycles. and you'll hear it on the modern radios. It's the first synthesized radio, as I said before, in which there was one crystal, one oscillator that can be made to operate over the entire range. It's modular construction, as all of the radios have gotten at this point in time, which I just realized is redundantly repetitive, point in time. And General Creighton Abrams said about 1967 that this is the single most important tactical item in Vietnam at the time, because they had prick 10s which drifted all over the place. Once they went to the prick 25s and crystal control, VFO control, synthesizer control, they were able to maintain communications under the harshest of battle conditions. It was replaced in 1977 by a prick 77, and that had a solid state power amplifier, among a couple of other modifications. For example, they added a broadband audio section so that an external encryption device, audio encryption device, can be used between the microphone and the radio. So there were some modifications made, but the basic RF circuits were the same in the prick 77 later on. These are my favorite radios. The PRT-4 or 4A is a single device transmitter. Its companion PRR-9, remember the PRR is receiver, PRT is transmitter, is a radio that clips onto a helmet. Yeah, no, it's not smart.
That's just small.
Oh, small, yeah. This is basically the set. There's no on-off, there's no power switch for the transmitter. It's basically the push-to-talk switch. So when you hit the push-to-talk switch, it sends out a signal. And then the receiver over here, this is a little horn, an audio horn that provides mechanical amplification of the sound. And the GI basically puts this thing on and uses it. But there's no muting between transmitter and receiver. So, pardon me?
You hear yourself?
No, you hear squeals.
Oh.
You could try that later on. You can try it later on. It's a dumb design.
I'm
Dumb.
not mistaken. When I was at Penn State, like in the, I'd say this was in like the 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Football games.
Yep.
They had RF stationed around the stadium
Yep.
as first aid squads.
Yep.
I swear they were using this.
It could be. And I actually did the same thing when I was in college in the Civil Air Patrol. We provided flight line. We had fun in Civil Air Patrol. We actually landed a stick of 10 Hueys from the Pennsylvania Air National Guard on our football field. And the ROTC guys asked the Civil Air Patrol to provide the flight line services. We had foam fire trucks and everything from the local fire department around. And we had these things, but they were in pairs. We had one person with the transmitter, another person with the receiver, so there wouldn't be any audio feedback.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it could be there.
That may have been what happened, because there were always two, there's a team of two all the time.
Yep,
So maybe-
that's because they weren't this close. You had to keep them 3 or 4 feet apart. Anybody else questions? Okay. The background, prototypes were tested in '64. It's a crystal control transmitter and receiver. It's 100% solid state. The Marines, God bless their souls, they decided this is stupid. Let's put something that's got a mute for the receiver on transmit and have an integrated unit, make something useful out of it. So you can see the sound horn. It looks like a Frankenstein, but it worked. They were happy with it. Specification. Guess what? High band, wide band, low band, wide band, VHF. Transmit power is 2 channels, 400 milliwatts or 50 to 250 milliwatts, depending on the tactical mission at the time. 2 channels via 2 crystals, and those are 2 little crystals that I think some of us will remember from the 1970s and crystal control VHF radios, the little tiny crystals. With the battery, that's 2.3 pounds, I think, or 1.6. Do the math, it's 9 pounds per watt, a lot better than 29 pounds per watt. There are 2 batteries. One is the transmitter operates on 15 volts, 2 9-volt batteries in series works fine. The receiver operates on 6 volts, 1 9-volt battery is fine, it doesn't fry. The features are, it's voice or tone signaling. So in other words, if you hit the push to talk in one direction, you can speak. If you hit it the other direction, a tone gets sent out to the receivers, which means lunch or open fire, whatever the predetermined signal means.
Did they ever use it for Morse code kind of stuff?
Probably. The 4A model, which I have here, included the first commercial integrated circuit. That 150 hertz at the top, and now we're in hertz. 150 hertz tone subcarrier oscillator was a little integrated circuit, which looks like a T08 case down at the bottom. So that was the first commercial use of integrated circuits in that radio. They were not deployed in large numbers, surprise, surprise. When the PRIC 25 became available in the mid-60s, it quickly replaced the PRT4 and the PRR9s. Now, additional features, that's all of the radio presentation I've got. I've got a few more slides to kind of wrap things up. All of the radio systems have custom test equipment available. For example, the item on the left, the GRM55, is a test meter specifically for the PRIC 25, PRIC 77 modules. It's kind of a go, no-go test. The other device was a set of battery testers, which actually applied the load equivalent of a radio to the battery. So you don't get open circuit voltage, you get voltage under load, which is what you want. The user manuals are excellent. If you know nothing about radio, you will be able to align these radios, get them on frequency with just simple test equipment and these manuals. It's remarkable how much time and effort went into putting these manuals together. Typical accessories include mounts with the power supply and audio amplifiers. This example is an audio mount for a GRC 160. It's a PRIC 25 that goes in a vehicle of some kind that operates off 28 volts from the vehicle power supply rather than a 15-volt battery, and it's got an audio amplifier and a control, push-to-talk control system. Headsets and speakers and mics, oh my. Spares kits. Every radio comes with a spares kit. This happens to be from the BC611. That contains spare tubes, spare crystal, and spare RF channel elements for the BC611. And remote control interface boxes. Imagine putting a PRIC 10 radio from the Korean War on top of a hill that is within sight of the enemy, but wanting to operate it remotely so that you're not subject to bombardment yourself. You put one of these devices near the radio at the top of the hill, connect the audio together, run the twisted pair wire down the hill to a companion box like that, plug a microphone into it, and the two operate, if there's an operator at the top of the hill, they can talk to each other through the intercom, or the operator at the bottom of the hill can actually activate the push-to-talk and volume controls by remote control with that intervening device. And all of the radios, backpack radios, have got it. Here are some other military radio systems that ought to be of interest to you. This is the BC-1000, the SCR-300. That's the walkie-talkie. Do the math. 62 pounds per watt. And they had 807 tubes in them. The tubes were like this. So number one, it was hot. Number two, it was heavy. Number three, it was crystal controlled. So that's the technology that was available. That you might get 5 to 10 miles depending on the terrain, but certainly not with the BC611 on 80 meters with a 3-foot tall antenna.
Was that used during World War II?
Yep.
Or?
That you'll see in Band of Brothers. That was in the Band of Brothers where they were at the edge of a clearing and they were going to take the town. I forget what the name of the town was. They actually had a BC-1000 on their back. Unfortunately, they were talking to a BC-611, which, as we all know, doesn't work. This is a horsey-talkie, seriously. It was a cavalry radio, also used for 2 to 6 megacycles, 3/4 of a watt AM. But that never saw action in World War II, thank God. This antenna is the antenna that detected the Japanese approach to Pearl Harbor from Opana Point in the northern part of Oahu on December 7th, 1941. It's outside BWI Airport, that antenna. So if anybody wants to see the antenna that detected the Japanese, and the output of which was ignored by the officers, no offense, take a look at that antenna. basically 106 megacycle antenna with 100 kilowatts PEP. And those are dipoles in front of reflector screens. So essentially it's a simple phased array. And that antenna is a fixed antenna. The SCR 271, no, that's the mobile antenna. The SCR 271 is a fixed antenna. It doesn't rotate. It is pointed manually at a fixed azimuth, and it's got a broad beam. So they were all over the Hawaiian Islands. This one was from Opana Point, which is the one that detected the approach of the Japanese from the north. Halicrafters, those of us with a little bit of gray in our hairs know the name Halicrafters. This is just an example of a repurposed shortwave receiver that's been packaged for military specifications, rack mounting. We all have heard of the Navajo code talkers. This radio is the typical radio that would have been used by the Japanese in the Pacific Theater of Operation, the TBY radio. It's a 28 to 80 megacycle radio, half-watt AM modulated CW. In other words, when you hit the key, it whistles. It whistles the Morse code. It sends out a tone, so it can be detected. There's no BFO that would be needed. It is not typically used in motion. It has to be set down on the ground because it's a super regenerative receiver, which has to be tweaked up to put it into oscillation to get it to receive signals. So I would not consider this a squad radio. It's a portable radio, but it still needs to be set up. An interesting story, at least to me, about the Navajo code talkers is there were other indigenous tribes in the United States who were used as code talkers. The Comanche, the Cherokee, the Lakota, for example. There are probably others, but the research I've done said it was not just the Navajo. And they were used almost exclusively in the Pacific Theater of Operation. They were not used in the European Theater of Operation other than on Normandy, the Normandy beaches, because Uncle Adolf in the 1930s had sent linguists to the United States to study these native languages. So the War Department and the FBI were aware that Uncle Adolf might have known what these guys were up to. The Japanese hadn't a clue, and up until 1980, when the top secret classification was revealed, the code had never been broken. So a little bit of trivia. This one is a tail warning radar. This was in the tail of, for example, a P-51 Mustang. It would warn the pilot when an aircraft was within 2,000 feet of his tail. It was also used as the altimeter trigger on board the Little Boy and Fat Man atomic weapons in World War II. Essentially, 4 of these were wired in series parallel. 2 were in parallel, 2 were in parallel, and their outputs, respectively, were in series. So if any two of the 4 would close within 2,000 feet of the ground, then the bomb trigger would be activated and the bomb would explode. After the presentation, I do have a picture if you want to see what it's like, how it was arrayed around the inside of Little Boy. But basically, that device was obliterated during the bombing of Hiroshima. Well, it works. This is the theme to the 7th Regiment. Little Big Horn. George Custer, his unit, this is his theme song. And they were instrumental in the Battle of Yadrang Valley. So I chose this as the ending song for this evening. We've heard this. That's it.
Yay.
If anybody wants to play with these afterwards, be my guest.
So they're operational?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.